we welcome you to the webinar series brought to you by the Centro Institute. My name is Ryan Manchi. I lead the Centro Institute, and I am your host for today. If you're here, hopefully you know about Centro, but if you're new to Centro, know that Centro is a provider of software for digital advertisers. Our technology, it's designed to boost media, team, and business performance by enabling advertisers to plan, buy, and analyze, all on a centralized and collaborative system that we call Basis. Our amazing team of media specialists and digital experts provide clients with raving fan service at every stage of any campaign. And our speaker for today brings more than 8 years of experience in the digital data and analytics space as Centro's VP of Client Data and Analytics. In this newly expanded role, Paul Troia oversees Centro's national team of data experts and is responsible for crafting and implementing data-driven activation and measurement strategies on behalf of Centro's clients, educating on best practices to maximize data return on investment. Paul lives in Chicago with his wife and 2 kids, and certain times of the year sports a very stunning mustache that I am openly envious of. Our webinar today is titled How to Harness the Power of Data. Over the next 30 minutes, we will explore why data may be one of the most powerful assets that marketers have available to them and dig into some ways to use that data effectively. Know that this webinar is being recorded and you will receive links to both the recording and the slides within the next 24 hours. And with that, I'll hand it over to Paul to treat us with all his tricks. Paul?
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate the kind words, and thank you everyone for joining. I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, data. So diving into the agenda pretty quickly, we're going to get started with a refresher. We're going to go over the various types of data available to marketers today and the relative importance. Within this, we're going to touch on what I feel is an often underutilized source for data collection, which is the data layer. We will touch briefly on regulatory governance. We will walk through how at Centro we create data-driven strategies on behalf of our clients. We will check off on some MarTech buzzwords, specifically CDPs and DMPs. And then we will walk through an outline and a framework for crafting your own data strategy. This will function as somewhat of a takeaway for you to kick off the internal conversations once the webinar is complete. And then we will wrap everything up with a data activation case study and reinforce a lot of the topics that we've covered today. So with that, let's jump right in. So the first couple slides here are going to be a review for a majority of people on the phone, but I think it's really important to get started with laying the foundation for our conversation today. So as many of you know, there are 3 primary types of data available to marketers today: first-party data, second-party data, and third-party data. First-party data, as you know, is data that you specifically have collected. It is absolutely unique to your business. No other organization has the same exact data points on your customers as you, and this is really what makes it such a valuable tool for your marketing efforts. Second-party data, on the other hand, is somebody else's first-party data. This is sold to you directly, either through a broker partnership or more commonly through a platform such as a DMP or another kind of data-based platform. Second-party data is an incredibly powerful tool to use for enriching your first-party data, because you are somewhat limited in the data. You can be somewhat limited in the data points you're able to collect on your consumers. So enriching you with second-party data is a really good data strategy. Lastly on the list, third-party data, which is by far the most prevalent data source out there. It is also the least precise and least expensive. This data typically comes from data aggregators, think Experian, Oracle, LiveRamp, organizations such as that. While all 3 of these data types play a very valuable role in a marketer's data arsenal, the majority of our conversation today is going to focus in on first-party data. So thinking about first-party data from the lens of a brand, why is it so important? As I mentioned on the last slide, the first-party data that you have or your clients have is completely unique to their organization. This uniqueness is what allows you to better align your marketing strategies with your overarching company objectives. It allows you to personalize the customer experience, whether that's through media or site interactions, ultimately leading to a higher lifetime value of these customers. Now, when we think about first-party data, the first thing that typically comes to mind is a CRM list. It's a laundry list of email addresses or people's names, phone numbers, things like that, that have been collected over 5, 10, 15 years worth of businesses' operations. First-party data moves well beyond just CRM lists. You can capture this information from events if you're handing out registries for 5Ks or things like that. It obviously includes data collected from in-store purchases, but it also includes any type of touch points on your own properties, whether those be actual online purchases or just general website interactions. We're going to focus in here on your own digital properties here because we are a digital organization and it is one of the easiest places to collect this type of information and also one of the fastest to turn around from data collection to actual activation. So diving a bit deeper into your own properties, I'd like to introduce some of you to the data layer, which in my opinion is a very often underutilized source for data collection. If you think about the walled gardens, for example, what makes a walled garden is the data that they have on their consumers. It is not unreasonable to think about your sites and your own properties in a similar fashion. As I mentioned earlier, the data that you have is absolutely unique to your organization. So thinking about that in the same way the walled gardens think about their walled gardens is a good way to look at the data layer. The data layer itself is a very powerful tool as it allows you to capture both structured and unstructured data from your own properties. The data layer itself is absolutely customizable, so you can pick and choose which attributes or values are most important to you and your organization to capture. Think if you want to capture SKU information, whether the consumer is putting that information in their cart and actually purchasing or putting it in their cart and abandoning it. The actual purchase price. You can look at the loyalty status of the consumer as they navigate the various pages of your site. You can also collect free-form fields in there, so if they're leaving comments or feedback. You can collect all that information and comb through it to derive insights about how your customers are interacting and perceiving your brand. What's great about this is with the right tools in place, capturing this information digitally allows for a very quick turnaround in real time to take advantage of these audiences. So collecting them and segmenting them into high-value customers or product-specific categories is something that can absolutely be done. So what does this data layer actually look like? Here's an example of a data layer. At first, this can be very overwhelming to many on the phone, but if you take a second to take a quick, deeper look at this, you'll see that it's actually a very simple way to extract very important information from your site. So this is an example of the Acme Clothing Company and a single purchase or a transaction ID. You see in the two blue boxes there, this consumer purchased a t-shirt which had the SKU of DD44, which falls under the apparel category and had a price of $11.99, and they purchased a quantity of 1. The second product they purchased was a pair of socks, which is also in the apparel category, which was priced at $9.99, but they bought 2 of them. So depending on the rules that you have set up within your organization and how you want to segment your user base, this user could potentially fall into an apparel category or a high-value customer if they spent more than $30. So depending on how you want to set up and segment your users, you can in real time pull information from the data layer on your users and put them into various buckets. Now, as you look to either expand, enhance, or adjust your data collection practices, whether it be the data layer or simple tags on your site, there are some things to take into consideration to ensure you're being compliant with the various regulations out there. The first thing to take into consideration is PII, or personally identifiable information. Now, the definition of PII varies dramatically by region. So the definition of PII in Europe is different than the definition of PII in South America or the United States or even California, a subset of the United States. Moving on to GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation. This is a regulation that has been in effect for roughly a year and a half in Europe, and this provides more power to the consumer to opt into data collection practices by marketers. If you have visited any major website in the last year and a half or even 2 years, you've noticed that when you hit the home page, there's a bar at the bottom or the top or someplace that's saying, informing you as a consumer that we are collecting information through cookies, and if you use our website, you are essentially opting in or agreeing to do that. The California Consumer Privacy Act, or the CCPA, is the first U.S. regulation coming out that is similar to GDPR. Some consider this to be kind of the tip of the spear for how regulations in the U.S. are going to unfold over the next few years, but it's too early to tell on that front. Now, if you take nothing else away from this entire presentation today, what I'd like to focus in on is this last bullet of seeking legal guidance. Depending on what your business objectives are, your business model, the industry you work in, the regulations that you are going to be playing around in or will be impacted by, I should say, are going to change. They do change, and violating these regulations can lead to some significantly costly fines. So it is very important as you are fleshing out your data collection practices and data activation practices to seek legal guidance to ensure you are buttoned up across the board. So moving on here, how does Centro create data-driven activation strategies on behalf of our clients? So I am a firm believer that simplicity breeds elegance. So we've kind of boiled down our process to a few simple to follow steps here. So the first step, and probably the most important step in my opinion, is the organization. This is the who, what, when, where, and why. And when the who here is who do we actually want to target? The what is what messaging do we want to communicate with them, or how do we want to communicate with them? The when is the campaign dates. Are we looking to gear up for Black Friday or a late holiday push, or is this a spring sale, a summer sale, something around Columbus Day? When do we need to have the media actually activated? And the where, so which channels do we want to activate on? Do we want to run across search and social? Do we want to do just programmatic? Do we want to buy media on job boards or Amazon? Where do we actually want to communicate with these users? And then the why. The why here is incredibly important and should always align with your business goals. One of the most important questions that we at Centro ask our clients when we formulate these types of strategy is not only why, what your business goals are, but also what does success look like? We want to make sure that as we're formulating our strategies, we are aligning everything we're doing to a clear, defined KPI and metric associated with that. After the foundation of the activation strategy has been set, the next thing we do at Centro is we look at the partnerships that we have in play to help achieve those goals. So we use a data management platform or a DMP. We have partnerships with LiveRamp, and then we obviously have our proprietary basis technology, which helps us achieve these goals. Once a campaign is actually live, the next important step is the analysis phase, a very fun step in my world. But what we're doing here is during and after the campaign is actually looking at the performance at varying levels of granularity against those predetermined set KPIs. We want to understand what is working, what is not working, and why are things working well or why things are not working well. After the campaign is complete, what we do is we look at the analysis, kind of get the lay of the land to see how things fleshed out, and then adjust our strategy as needed. Are we still going after, are our business objectives still the same, or do we need to adjust a little bit? Depending on what that is, we will look at the analysis and look to see how we need to make any kind of adjustments, whether it's from an organization, a partnership, or a partnership standpoint. So I've mentioned DMPs a few times, or data management platforms, and another buzzword that's been floating around for the last year or two are CDPs, or customer data platforms. So I wanted to touch on these at a pretty high level to outline the similarities and differences. So the primary differences between a CDP or a customer data platform and a DMP are the customer data platforms, or CDPs, are built around first-party data. They contain PII, that is the primary level of granularity that the data is aggregated to. DMPs, on the other hand, are built around third-party data, and the data is collected anonymously and is aggregated against a DMP ID. There is no PII data within the DMP. CDPs and DMPs are similar in the fact that they both allow for real-time segmentation, and you can gather information and data across channels, whether that's offline data, search data, social data, programmatic data, email data, etc. And one of the last and biggest differences between these two is DMPs are looked at as activation platforms. They have a lot of third-party data integrations, both from a data standpoint, but then also partnerships where you can actually take your audiences that you've built or modeled or enriched in some way in the DMP and actually activate upon them. As I've mentioned, Centro, we use the DMP here, and the primary reason why we have enlisted the services of a DMP is on our managed service side of the business, we needed a very flexible solution to implement across the hundreds of clients that we support on an annual basis. The DMP allows us to implement advanced data collection strategies for our clients. We can model the audiences that we're collecting and enrich it with the third-party data within the DMP. And additionally, there's a direct integration with our DMP relationship and basis, which allows for us to easily take the data that we've captured and take action on it on behalf of our clients. Additionally, the data within the DMP is collected anonymously and is compliant with GDPR type regulations. We chose not to go down the path of utilizing a CDP because really there's no need for us as an organization to store our clients' PII data. We are not in the business of building a data co-op, so there's no need for us to house or store that information in any way. Additionally, CDPs have minimal external connections, which make them not as ideal of activation partners. Can we work with CDPs is a question we get a lot, and the answer is absolutely. There are a couple different ways we can actually work with a CDP. We can either ingest it directly into our DMP if there are connections that exist, or more commonly, we can take that information out of the CDP and utilize our relationship with LiveRamp to push that either directly to our DMP or to our basis platforms for activation. So as you're listening to this and wondering, well, I don't have a DMP, I don't have a CDP, which one should I use? Well, the answer is not very straightforward. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution for everybody. So as you are going through and evaluating whether or not you need to bring a DMP into the fold or a CDP into the fold, here are some questions to help with that evaluation. Because every business is unique, I like to start with 3 simple questions. The first one being, what data do you need to collect? Are you looking to capture digital data? Is online data incredibly important? Do you need first-party data, second-party data, third-party data? What is the type of data that you want to build this relationship around? The second question is, how is it going to be organized? Do you need it to be aggregated anonymously, or do you need it to be aggregated against the PII data that you have? Are you a brand? Are you an agency? It all kind of depends there. Third, once the data is actually collected, what's next? What is your end goal with collecting and organizing and segmenting this data? Are you looking to activate it, or are you looking to use it for more internal type analyses? So answering these questions goes a long way in identifying the type of relationship with these vendors you should, or the type of vendor you should forge a relationship with. Building out what we've covered so far, the next few slides will provide you with a framework for crafting your own data strategy. Now, I've listed it out here at the top as crawl, walk, run, because while all the necessary steps are listed out here, this is absolutely an iterative process. In no organization have I seen this be a one-and-done type of an exercise. So keeping that in mind, starting up at the top, the first step here is to identify your business goals. What, as an organization, are you striving for? What is your end goal? Are you looking to increase online sales? Are you looking to increase brand awareness of a specific product? Are you looking to drive more in-store traffic? What is the most important objective for you with this marketing campaign? Once you have that outline, the next step here is to look internally. What data do you have versus what data do you need? Do you have all of the information at your disposal to start accomplishing those goals? If you do not, the next step here is to adjust, and this is where the data layer comes in. You can adjust or expand your data collection practices to align with these goals and objectives. Once you have a good foundation built of what you're trying to do, and you have an understanding of the data that you have and the data that you need, the next step here is to look at the tools. Are there tools in the marketplace that I need to accomplish these goals? If there are these the types of tools I want to own internally? Do I have the resources to do that? Or is it best to work with a partner, somebody like Centro, who has relationships pre-built with a bunch of these different partners? Once that is settled, the next step is to create your strategy. This is the who, what, when, where, and why of the data activation process. So again, aligning with your business goals. Who are we targeting? What do we want to communicate with them? Where are we going to target them, and when? Second to last, during the campaign and after the campaign, analyze performance against those KPI goals. You're starting probably to see a few themes throughout this presentation of setting the foundation, analyzing, and then repeating. And then lastly, repeating, and make any adjustments that you need to align with your business goals? Are they new? Are they the same? What exactly is it that you're trying to accomplish? This slide here is designed to help further visualize the concepts we've kind of discussed on the last few slides. So this is an example of how at Central we approach a first-party data media strategy with some of the tools, more specifically the DMP, at our disposal. So there's a lot of information on here, but we're going to break it down kind of bit by bit. So starting on the far left, this is your business, and these are the various touch points where your first-party data can exist. Now, not every organization has first-party data in all of these forms or formats, but there will be some that align with your organization. All of this information can be ported into our DMP, and then the gray boxes are our various business objectives. So are we trying to run acquisition strategies and acquire new customers? Are we trying to retain existing customers? Or are we trying to grow and cross-sell our existing customers? So from an acquisition standpoint, utilizing the DMP, what we typically do is we ID attributes and behaviors that are most similar to our high-value customers. We build lookalike models, and we push those audiences out to various activation channels to try and find more like users. For retention, we will use the DMP to profile the people that are visiting and purchasing on your site to get a better understanding of who your customers are, what makes them tick, and tailor our messages that way through custom segmentation practices. For growth, for example, we will identify those high-value customer bases again and cross-sell them on new products that have similarities with the existing products that they like to buy. Or we can use that to A/B test various creative or product messaging strategies. Once everything is pushed out through the activation centers, we obviously let it run, and then the insights and optimizations during and after the campaign analyze performance against those set KPIs. How did we do? What could we do better? And that information will feed back into your business in one of the various first-party data sections or in another format, and then we repeat. So there's a lot of information here, but if you just break it down bit by bit with kind of everything else that we've talked about, it's a nice visual to kind of see from first-party data collection all the way through to activation and then repeating. So to kind of round out our conversation today, I wanted to touch on a case study. We put this together late last year, I think, and we had a client who was a millennial-focused retailer. They considered themselves to be fairly hip. They were struggling across a few categories: market share, brand loyalty, holiday e-commerce sales. They did have some brick-and-mortar locations in top-tier cities, and their overarching goal of the campaign was to increase year-over-year e-commerce sales by 10%. We were pretty lucky here. They had a lot of robust data available to play around with, including their CRM list. We were able to capture their online purchasers, their online site visitors, and they had an email list to share with us as well. At the risk of beating a dead horse here, we started with an internal analysis of their customer base. Again, once you have your objectives lined out, you look internal to see, get the lay of the land, see what's going on. So the client came to us with their expectations of what their customer base looked like, who they were, their incomes, things like that. Our analysis showed a very different purchase base than what they had come with. The audience that we saw skewed older, was more male, and had lower incomes than our client expected. Additionally, we saw that a high percentage of their customer base was actually purchasing outside of the DMAs they had originally considered for the campaign and were outside of the DMAs where they had brick and mortar locations. Based off of this internal analysis, the activation strategy we arrived at was CRM retargeting of high value customers, so using that profiling to influence that segmentation, building lookalike models off of those customers to find more like users, like their high value consumers. We use the DMP for data collection and real-time segmentation. So understanding that if, based off of the rules that we have with the client, if this consumer spent X amount of dollars about one of these products, they were deemed high value or luxury or something to that effect, and use that for real-time segmentation for retargeting and cross-selling, as well as lookalike model building. Additionally, we were able to expand geographically and focus our campaign on DMAs outside of the client's original DMA list. The result of all of this is building that strong foundation with analysis equaled strong results. So we observed an e-commerce year-over-year sales lift of 12%, which was 20% above the 10% goal, which was a great success for the client. Additionally, the analysis that we performed on their consumers impacted strategy beyond just digital. They took that information and tweaked their email and catalog distribution campaigns as well. And lastly, the identification of the users outside of their top tier or their existing DMAs sparked a broader business conversation for them internally about where should they have brick and mortar locations, or do they need to expand, close, et cetera. Obviously something we can't help with, but the analysis we did with the DMP really helped kind of kickstart larger conversations within their organization. So I know we've covered a lot here today, so I wanted to summarize this before we get into the Q&A session with some key takeaways. The first takeaway here is your data is absolutely a key asset. No organization has the exact same data on your customers as you or your clients do. As you go through and work to build out your data activation strategies, the most important thing you can do is align those strategies and objectives with your overarching business objectives. Third, understanding the tools at your disposal. So as you're looking to build these strategies, looking at the partners that you have and the technology that you have internally, and identifying holes in your arsenal, looking at, do you need to bring in new partners yourself, or do you want to partner with an organization like Centro who has some of these partnerships pre-existing to help kind of shore up some of those gaps? And then lastly, always measure and repeat. During the campaign and after the campaign, measure performance against the various KPIs, make adjustments, and then repeat. And with that, I'll kick it back to Ryan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Paul. That was great. I feel like so insightful. I feel like there's a lot of confusion and areas that people are just kind of nervous about of where to get started or how to really take it to the next level. So I appreciate you going through that. And you covered a lot there. I imagine there are some questions. We've already got a few that have come in, but as we move into the Q&A time, there is a question tab that's in the webinar app, kind of on the right-hand side. So if you want to go in and plug any questions that you have that maybe popped up as Paul was walking through, or near the end as he was kind of wrapping up, and we'll do our best to try to get through each one of those questions. I think I've got one to maybe kind of kick things off, Paul. What do you feel like the biggest misconception is? Like, you and your team meet with so many different clients of Centro. What's the biggest misconception that they have about the first-party data that they've got access to?
I'd say the biggest misconception is that it might not be enough. There are a lot of times where clients will come to us with incomplete first-party data, and they're afraid that they can't actually take action on it, where we have some of the tools in place, including our DMP, to help enrich and enhance the data that they have. So even if there's a minimal amount of information there, it's always worth having a conversation around the type of data that they have, and obviously tying that back to their larger business objectives and what they're trying to accomplish with activating on those users.
Yeah. Well, it's great. And there actually one of the questions that came in right before you were talking was around the idea of first-party data and the minimum number of records. At one point, I know that it was around like 100,000, right? That you needed to have. Is that still the same, or is that kind of an ideal scenario, or has that come down a little bit for maybe these kind of mid-size or smaller organizations?
So 100,000 records is absolutely an ideal number to get started with, but it also depends on what we're trying to accomplish. So if it's a straight retargeting exercise, having 100,000 users is great. Having 15,000 users isn't as good. But if you're looking at building a lookalike audience within a DMP or another platform, having a smaller seed audience is okay, because the purpose of the lookalike model is to take that audience, identify the attributes, and then expand and grow that audience broader. So 100,000 is an absolutely great starting point, but there are some things we can do with smaller lists.
Gotcha. Okay. I feel like there's still, I mean, I even like going into this, I think I had some confusion about the differences between the CDP and a DMP. Why do you think there's confusion about kind of the differences between those? Is it just not being talked about correctly in the marketplace, or there, I know you talked about some of the similarities, but also some of the differences. Any thoughts on why there's confusion?
Their acronyms are pretty similar, for one.
Yeah.
And there are, I mean, in the MarTech world, there are a lot of acronyms, and it can be easily confusing. And the DMPs and CDPs essentially do the same type of thing. It's just the types of data that they're collecting and organizing and what you can ultimately do with it is what really separates them. I know Centro has put out a blog post or two on this as well, which goes into some more detailed information on the differences between the two.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe a good follow-up to kind of break that down a little bit further from what you covered. There's a question about like where the CDP sits, and I know you had the visualization, but I'll read the question to you. I read that a CDP sits on top of an existing data warehouse platform. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it depends on the CDP partner. There are some that will actually store the information for you, and there are others that will sit on top of the data infrastructure that you have. I don't know specifics on which ones do which offhand, but I know that there are various ways to incorporate that into your existing tech stack.
That's great. When you're talking about lookalike audiences, there's a couple questions that came through, kind of similar. What data is needed, maybe in an ideal scenario, to build that lookalike audience? So you said maybe it's a smaller amount potentially, but what actual data is needed? And then can you maybe talk through that process of how that's kind of loaded? I think you briefly touched on that, but maybe go back into that a little bit.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you think about building a lookalike audience off of a smaller CRM list of high value customers. So these are lists of 20,000 users that spent more than $20,000 with you in the last 12 months, let's say. So the way the lookalike models work is, as a company, you know that this group of users spent X amount of dollars and qualifies for this segment, but you don't have most of the time all of the additional attributes of those users. So their age, their income, their interests, their hobbies, whether or not they have children, do they like pets, what kind of car do they drive, things like that. When we ingest that type of data or that CRM list into our data management platform or our DMP, we have the ability to enrich that audience and fill in a lot of those gaps and those profiles of those users. So for example, if we found of those 20,000 users, every one of them owned a pet and had a child over the age of 14. You're like, okay, and this is a super simplified example. There's a lot more that goes into it. In our lookalike model audience, some of the key attributes we would look for are people with children over the age of 14 and who have pets, something to that effect. So the DMP allows us to kind of round out the profile of the audience that we are given. This can be similarly done with an organization brokering or ingesting second-party data to enrich their first-party data as well.
Gotcha. Okay. And there's a couple questions again, like additional clarification. So differences, I guess, between like CRM and a CDP. The CDP is what actually would ingest the CRM data, right, and then allow you to organize that in a better and a different way for activation. Is that correct? Or kind of break down some of the differences?
Yeah. So the CRM, the way that I like to look at it is it's essentially a list of customers. And within the CDP, what you have is that CRM list, but let's say it's Paul Troya, and I could potentially have 10, 15, 12, 20 entries depending on how often I've interacted with that brand. So within that CDP, you could see that I purchased this pair of shoes 6 months ago. I bought this t-shirt last week. I attended this event. I ran this 5K. The CDP is really designed to aggregate all of the various touch points that brand has with that individual across all of the different channels, whether it be offline, online, purchases, events, things like that.
Got it. Okay. So kind of circling back to the enriched data, if somebody's running a retargeting campaign right now with Basis, how would they go about getting that enriched data or working with Centro to be able to run a lookalike campaign on those people that were targeted? How is that captured, and how can that be activated on?
Absolutely. So if we're capturing audiences for the purposes of building a lookalike model, the way that it would work is we would provide a DMP tag. Let's say the lookalike was based off of cart abandoners. We would provide two DMP tags, one being a control tag that would be placed across the client's entire site, which would allow us to pull information into the DMP, and then various event tags to capture events on the site as well. Once that information would flow into our DMP, we would build the model within the DMP and then activate that to Basis, or send that to Basis for activation, rather.
Gotcha. Okay. From like an investment perspective, what's the recommendation for an organization? Like, are there general guidelines that we have? Just thinking about, okay, if you've got a small business, they've got some data, they're looking to drive some better insights. What kind of budget do they need to have, or are there some things that they can do maybe with even a lighter budget from an investment perspective until they're able to maybe prove out some of those results?
So what kind of dollar investment would it take to kind of activate across those lists? Is that what you're kind of asking?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if there's some like general guidelines there to maybe kind of like prove out or kind of get started, especially for the kind of mid-size or smaller organizations.
Absolutely. So it depends on what the strategy is, but in general, I like to see between $10,000 to $20,000 a month.
Okay, that's great. Is there more information on how we utilize a DMP to analyze all the channel data and performance metrics?
So where we can utilize the DMP to analyze all the channel. Yeah, so if all of the various marketing touch points are tagged and captured within our DMP tags and brought into the DMP, we have the ability to not only analyze the data within the DMP and use some of the pre-built reports and functionality in there, but we also have access to the raw, more granular data to perform attribution type exercises, not necessarily modeling, but more of a kind of storytelling and path to conversion story.
Gotcha. Okay. What about kind of easiest? I know you talked about first-party data, but there's I think some mention of the third-party data, maybe enriching some of the first-party data. What's the easiest way to find, or the best way to find quality third-party data?
Ooh, that's a good question. So within Basis DSP or Basis, we have access to a pre-vetted list of quality third-party data vendors. So if you are activating within our proprietary technology, depending on what parameters you wanted to place on your marketing strategies, we have the ability to do that either directly in the DSP or with the DMP. Working with a reputable vendor like Centro is always the best way to go. We have spent time and effort and money on vetting a lot of these partners and ensuring that we have a robust, kind of high quality solution for our clients.
Gotcha. We've got a couple follow-ups, I think, as the kind of general guideline that you gave from an investment perspective, that some folks working actually with some smaller businesses that may seem a little bit out of reach. Are there any of the things that you kind of covered or that you could recommend from a first party data activation that even smaller businesses that may not be prepared to make that investment on a monthly basis could utilize, or is it just a matter of the maturity of the market is not there yet for the prices to come down?
Yeah, so the numbers I gave are pretty ideal, but there are some ways to do it with less. And one other thing to take into consideration that I didn't touch on is how much you can actually spend is very dependent on how large the audience is. So a smaller audience that you have, you're not going to be able to spend that much anyway, versus if you have an audience with 1, 2, 3 million users, you're going to be able to spend more of your budget across those in a responsible way without blowing out the frequency. So there are ways, depending on the situation and the client relationship, that falls outside of my realm of expertise on how we actually structure those. But there are ways to engage with us in lower commitment ways, I imagine.
Sure. So for as you talk about like building out the lookalike models, how much of that is fully kind of managed services by your team and the larger Centro Media Services group versus what can be done on a self-serve basis?
So right now, any of the offerings within our DMP are limited to our managed service business. This is a contractual obligation that we have, and unfortunately, there is no way to wiggle around that at this moment.
Gotcha. Okay. What you talked a little bit about the PII and kind of things related to GDPR and CCPA. Obviously, with the California Consumer Privacy Act, kind of we've got a little bit of time as some of that's been released. But any additional recommendations on organizations that are looking to prepare and be maybe a little bit more proactive?
You can bring in auditors and security experts to ensure that everything that you have done to date and your systems that you have in place are set up to ensure compliance with the various regulations. It can be difficult because the regulations are kind of up in the air somewhat, but it is a good place to take a hard look internally at the data you're collecting, how you're storing it, and what you're actually doing with it before some of these regulations come into play.
Gotcha. Okay. So here's a question around, we're looking to staff up our company. It sounds like they're on the marketer side beyond a team of brand managers. What types of skills should we be looking for as we look to hire data specialists, basically?
It's a great question. I would say a strong understanding of data collection practices, a strong understanding of how DMPs work, somebody that has had hands-on experiences within DMPs or a CDP as well. People that understand first, second, third-party data like the back of their hand is always a good choice too. And the data collection practices, or the ability to understand how data is collected and organized, is a very invaluable skill.
That's great. All right, there's one more about when Centro creates segments through their DMP. Are these custom segments, or do these use predefined set of segments like Claritas or Personix?
So these are our
custom segments, right?
Yeah, the custom segments built around the data that we're collecting on behalf of our clients. So, for example, if we had a client that wanted to retarget frequent shoppers, we would look to see anybody that we would collect information about anybody that had purchased more than 3 times in the last 3 weeks or a month or whatever that time frame is. We would work with the client on setting those parameters, and then we would set those kind of borders or those rule build-outs within the DMP or the DSP directly, depending on what we needed to do, and build these audiences and activate on them on behalf of our clients.
That's great. Cool. All right. Any closing words or thoughts, Paul, as we wrap things up?
No, I just know there was a lot that we covered on today. I appreciate everyone sitting through all of it. If there are follow-up questions, I think they'll funnel through you, Ryan, right?
Yeah.
But absolutely. I think we covered almost everything.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Paul, and thank you everyone for joining us, for the great questions. This does conclude our presentation for today. When you log out, you will receive a survey, and I appreciate you giving us your feedback on your experience today. But there's also a question there about future topics, and I very much welcome suggestions on what you'd like to hear more about as we prepare for more great content in 2020. The slides presented, as well as a recording of the webinar, will be sent to you via email, as I mentioned earlier. I am Ryan Manchi. This has been the webinar series brought to you by Centro Institute, and we're glad that you joined us. Thank you so much.